Aloha and good afternoon. Today we are going to discuss a current issue in Honolulu that has been quite newsworthy. It's been on television, it has been in the media, and it's a social, economic issue. And the issue that we are going to talk about this afternoon is the homeless in Hawaii. And not only the homeless, but this afternoon, our guests will talk about the homeless and their civil liberties, because all Americans under the United States Constitution is entitled to civil liberties. The problem that confronts us in Hawaii now is that under the shadow of many of these very expensive condominiums, such as in Kaka'ako, we have the homeless living there. And it's a issue that was not in Hawaii until just recently. In the past, maybe even 2 or 3 years ago, we did not have homeless living as I said, in the shadows of the condominium in Kaka'ako, and some live under the bridges where the highway pass every day, and now they are also living along the stream in Kapalama. And to prevent the homeless from living there, they have built a fence, so that prevents the homeless from living there. This afternoon, our guest is Carl Varady, and he is an attorney. So welcome, Carl, to our program this afternoon.
Thank you.
And maybe to start, you can give us your experience in the law as it relates to civil liberties.
Thank you for having me, Roy, and for inviting me to be here today. The parts of my legal career that are relevant to this issue, I think, are that before moving to Hawaii, I worked for the city of Boulder, Colorado as a corporation counsel. So I'm generally familiar with the health and safety, zoning, and other ordinances.
Before we go on, maybe for the public, maybe you can explain what the corporation counsel is, because many of the viewing public may not be aware.
Sure, that's fine. I worked for the city of Boulder, representing the city and enforcing its ordinances governing public health and safety. The zoning ordinances, development ordinances, and the like that the city of Boulder has, like the city and county of Honolulu, and seeing that those were properly written, constitutional, and properly enforced.
Before we go on, Carl, why Boulder and not San Francisco or New Orleans? Or was it your home?
No, it's a place that I moved to after graduating law school. I actually grew up in Michigan. And the cold, frozen north of Detroit was much less attractive than the mountains and the sunny winters that exist in Colorado. I loved Colorado. I had friends also who moved there after law school, and it was just a natural landing spot for me.
As an attorney in the Corporation Counsel's office in Boulder, did you have direct contact with the homeless problem at that time?
Actually, I did.
You did?
Yeah, our Boulder is a charter city. So on the mainland, charter cities have self-governance in a way that is different than the city and county structure here. The Boulder, like Honolulu, is an attractive place. Although the winters do have snow, they're more temperate because it's very sunny. And there is, and was at that time, a large population of transient people who did not have houses. One of the things that Boulder did to address that while I was living there was an abandoned bus station. And it was a natural a building that could be used to accommodate transients who had no housing, people who had no housing, people who lived in Boulder who had no housing.
I see.
It could have access to shelter and bathrooms and sanitation and the like.
And after your experience in Boulder, then what happened?
I moved here
Yes.
and worked for the American Civil Liberties Union for a period of about 3.5 years as its legal director.
I see. Maybe at this point again, Carl, could you explain what the Civil Liberties Union is?
Well,
Is it a nonprofit?
It's a nonprofit organization. It's a membership organization.
I see.
And what it does is it seeks to represent and preserve the Constitution and civil rights in the United States. So it conceives of its true client as being the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Now that gets played out in individual cases that we can talk about later.
Right.
But the idea is it's an organization dedicated to preserving and advancing constitutional and civil rights issues in the United States.
Carl, were you appointed as the director?
I was hired. I was employed by the organization as its legal director.
They contacted you in Colorado?
No, I was in transition and moved here. The position became open after I came to Hawaii.
I see.
I had 2 opportunities, one actually to work for the state of Hawaii and one with the ACLU, and I took the ACLU position.
Any reason?
It was more consistent with my own personal beliefs and my own aspirations as an attorney to serve what I believe are the highest interests in law, which are the Constitution and our civil rights.
Now, Carl, let's get down to the issue at hand, and that's the homeless in Hawaii. Many of the questions I will ask you, Carl, you can explain in your own terms. It doesn't have to be the official opinion of any organization. But let me ask you, what is your take on why we have so many homeless now as opposed to maybe 2 or 3 years ago? Suddenly we have this homeless wherever we tend to go. I'm just surprised at the number of homeless. And the thing that really is sad to me is that many of these homeless are children. And so it's a very emotional situation for many of us. And so what is your take on why we have so many homeless in Hawaii?
Well, I agree. It is very disturbing to be driving by places like Kaka'ako, Ala Park, et cetera, and see children living homeless. I'm only a general student of this issue in terms of the causes of what I think might be better called houselessness rather than homelessness, because as my understanding is, the majority of people living houseless are from Hawaii. So it's not as if they're not home, they simply have no housing, no shelter. And the, I think, fairly obvious reason, primary reason is cost. If you look at the most recent statistics that I'm aware of, the median cost of a single family home now has crossed the $700,000 line. That's the median is just the number in the middle between the highest and the lowest. The average is actually almost $900,000. It's $875,000. So purchasing a home for most people is very difficult, especially if they don't have parents or grandparents who were in the housing market and who benefited from the escalation in housing prices. So I think cost is the biggest factor. Another factor that people have been discussing recently is that the subsidies for military housing are quite high. And what you're doing in the rental market there as a prospective renter is you have to compete with subsidized rents, which are driving rental prices up everywhere and making it very difficult for people who are not members of the armed services to compete in that rental market.
So if we were to look at this situation, it's a situation where we have limited affordable housing, and we have competitors like those in the military with high subsidies. So the so-called local residents have a situation where to even qualify to purchase a home, 700,000 or 900,000, is very difficult because many of these developers will require a down payment, and even to obtain the necessary down payment is very difficult.
Well, sure. If you're even if you're buying a condo in Kaka'ako at a $500,000, you know, you're going to have to come up with some of that.
Right.
You know, 10 or 20%. That's a significant amount of money.
Right.
And the issue for people working in Hawaii, especially the working poor, is that you accumulating that amount of money over a period of time that would allow you to buy it, you're always chasing the market. And the market continues to escalate.
Right. And, you know, I have many friends, in a joking way, they say they're, you know, one step close to becoming a homeless person, because the cost of living is also very expensive in Hawaii. And I'm quite surprised when I, you know, talk to some of my friends or others, that many of them, including their children, live in cars. And I read recently that many of the students who live in cars are looked down upon by their classmates because they can't have a home to live in. So it's a very complex issue as far as I'm concerned. And let me ask you, what is your understanding of the number of homeless that come from the mainland or out of state? Do you have any
just
idea?
Very, very generally, my understanding is the primary bulk of people without housing in Hawaii are from Hawaii. I'm sure there is some component that is from elsewhere, from the mainland and whatnot. Their struggle, of course, would be if you have money for housing, how do you have money to get back? But I think the bulk of it, I think the bulk of people clearly are local, you know, and people who grew up here and simply do not have the economic resources or the family supports or whatever to afford rental housing in a shrinking market.
Carl, we will be taking a short break here. So anyone who has any question, please tweet us at ThinkTech Hawaii. We'll take a short break. Thank you. We're doing good.
Okay, this is ThinkTech Hawaii, and it's Wednesday. Every Wednesday is Energy Wednesday here in Hawaii, the state of clean energy. 4 to 5 p.m. every Wednesday. Come and listen to us. And just to show you what I mean, I'm going to ask Sharon to tell us more.
Come and see us every Wednesday, as Jay said. And we have people like Jim Albers from HECO here and co-host Ray Starling here every Wednesday. We not only go on Olelo and OC16, but also stream live. So please come visit us, hear about the latest in clean energy.
Okay, Jim, you've been here. You got any comment on all this?
As important as energy is in all of our lives today, this is a great forum and a great format to vet those issues. So I encourage everybody to listen in and participate.
Okay, Ray, what do you think for a close?
Well, I think this is the greatest show in the energy world here in Hawaii. You can come here every week, 1 hour, and catch the latest on what's happening and hear from the people who really know what's going on, like Jim Alberts. We appreciate your coming today.
Thank you.
Ray Starling, Sharon Moriwaki, Jim Alberts, and Jay Fidel here in Hawaii, the state of clean energy, 4 to 5
Aloha.
p.m. Wednesday. Aloha.
Aloha.
Thank you again. We are back, and this afternoon our subject is the homeless in Hawaii and their civil liberties. Carl Varady is my guest this afternoon. And Carl, let us get to the subject at hand. What specifically are the civil liberties that are guaranteed to the homeless, especially in the context of what is happening currently? You know, I think you are aware there are all these sweeps that they refer to. They're sweeping Kaka'ako, they have swept Waikiki, and they sweep people living under the bridges. So I ask you, as someone connected with the Civil Liberties League, what are specifically the constitutional guarantees?
Well, there are three, actually. One is the fundamental right to travel. And that has not played a role so much in Hawaii because we're an island state. But there have been cases in the past where so-called vagrancy laws have been used to try and exclude people moving from one state to another, crossing state lines. And the courts have found that restrictive laws that, for example, if you're receiving public assistance and you move from one state to another, and the state to which you move has significant restrictions on you receiving public assistance and prevents you from doing so, that would be impinging on your right to travel. And those have been struck down.
All right.
That's not so much at play here. The two things that are at play in Hawaii are the Fourth Amendment protection against unreasonable searches and seizures of persons, property, papers, and effects that occurs coextensively with the sweeps that they're having now.
All right.
The second is the due process clause that says you cannot be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. That comes into play in the post-seizure context because what's happening is the property being seized in the most recent sweeps is being destroyed
Right.
without giving any person a reasonable opportunity to challenge the destruction or even seizure of that property.
But Carl, practically speaking, as I watch the television programs, these huge trash trucks come. All of the things belonging to the homeless are just dumped into the dumpsters or the dump trucks.
Yes, and that's that's part of the current argument, the current case.
Right.
Because even the ordinance,
Yeah.
the stored property ordinance and the sidewalk ordinance provide that the only perishable items will be destroyed immediately. The rest of the property is supposed to be preserved. Under the stored property ordinance, you're supposed to get an opportunity to pay $200 to get, your pallet and your tarp back or whatever, if you can find your way out to Holava to get it. Or you can request a hearing if you can find your way out to Kapolei and read the English-only brochure that provides you some sort of means of getting your property back. The fact that they're just grabbing it and throwing it into the rubbish truck demonstrates more clearly than anything that the city is not playing fairly under the Fourth Amendment protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, and the due process clause that provides that your property can't be taken or destroyed unless you're given the opportunity first to have a neutral decision maker say, oh, you know what, not do that, because this is not a threat to public health and safety. Now, if the city can demonstrate, for example, that somebody has a piece of equipment or some sort of structure that is a clear danger to public health and safety, then it can go in. And an example would be if there were a fire in a building and the building were in such a condition that it was going to collapse and maybe affect other people or other buildings, the city could come in and tear it down to prevent further harm. That's not what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with people coming down the street with a garbage truck, grabbing lawn chairs, tents, tarps.
Right.
One of the plaintiffs in the lawsuit now
Right.
is a 16-year-old pregnant girl who lives on a pallet with a tarp over her. Those were seized. She has no place to
Store.
get shelter
I see.
at this time. And the really complicated
Right.
and costly way of getting that property back is wholly unreasonable. The other thing that they're taking are personal papers. So if you're someone who has a state ID card
Right.
and a birth certificate,
Right.
and those are seized,
Right.
and you can't get those back because you don't have the $200 to pay to get them back, or you don't have a way of getting out to Halava or wherever they're stored to retrieve them, and how are you going to replace them? How are you going to prove your identity?
Right,
And those
right.
documents are critical for anybody who wants to get out of poverty, because you have to show them to an employer. Are you going to get employment?
Let me ask you this, Carl, on a practical basis. If I remember correctly, the city and county does give notice we are going to have a sweep tomorrow or 2 days from now or whatever. And knowing that for the homeless to keep the valuable papers that you spoke of out of the reach of the homeless, I cannot understand. If I had important papers, I would keep it with me or in my backpack or whatever. I cannot understand why these homeless would keep valuable papers.
Well, let me tell you, first of all,
Yes.
those notices
Yes.
are deficient. Because
Why?
the
Why
city-
are they deficient?
The city's own ordinance says you have to be personally warned in writing that these objects are going to be seized. The city
Yeah.
doesn't do that. Instead, they're putting up a couple signs. What if you don't read English?
Oh, I see.
What if you don't see the sign?
I see.
What if you speak English, but you're illiterate?
Mm-hmm.
And no one has said to you, these things are going to happen? Then what? So the people at the bottom of society, by bottom I don't mean anything other than the quality of lives that they're experiencing, are those that are hurt the most by these, and the people who are most affected are the least likely to get out of poverty. The city's doing nothing to help.
Carl, let me just interject here now. Recently, the Civil Liberties League brought a case in the federal district court, if I remember.
That's correct.
And if I recall again, it was Judge Gilmore
That's correct.
who ruled against the homeless. She said, if I read it correctly, she said there wasn't enough information or facts before her that she could make a ruling. And am I reading it correctly?
No, I think you're not quite there.
Yeah.
What she said was, I understand these arguments and these are important.
Right.
But what I need is a better factual record. The plaintiffs represented by the ACLU and Alston Hunt Floyd and Ing, the law firm Alston Hunt Floyd and Ing, had a very detailed record presented before the court, but they were seeking immediate relief.
I
They
see.
wanted the judge to step in immediately and stop the sweep. Now, it's very difficult to get a TRO, and what the judge said was, I'm not comfortable making the decision based on the factual record you've given me. She didn't make any
ruling.
as to who was likely to prevail.
I see.
But what she did say is come back in December with a better factual record, and I will give both sides an opportunity to make their case, and then I'll decide.
Carl, between now and December, a lot of things can happen. So by December, there's a whole new ball game.
For the people who are affected by the sweep,
Right,
their property is gone.
Right.
They may or may not be able to get it back.
Right.
But the likelihood of someone having $200
Right.
to retrieve their property,
yeah,
I think it's more likely they'll take the $200 if they have it and go back to, one of the big box stores and buy another lawn chair and another tent. So I think you're right. I mean, I think the passage of time is a hardship for these folks, and it's unfortunate. But I think that when any judge, any federal judge is asked to make a constitutional decision that may limit the city's authority to enforce its own laws, rightfully, she or he is going to want a fully developed factual record. Now, why it takes
yeah.
to December, I don't know. I'm not aware of the facts. Could be the judge's calendar. It could be something the parties requested. I don't know. But clearly, she wanted more facts before making a decision so that she's confident that her ruling is consistent with what the Ninth Circuit had said in the case against Los Angeles. Los Angeles was doing essentially the same thing that Honolulu is doing.
Right.
And the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which governs the federal law in Hawaii,
Right.
said that these are violations of the Due Process Clause and the Fourth Amendment when you come in and seize property in this way and you don't give people a meaningful way of having a hearing before the property is seized.
Carl, let me interrupt you again. Am I to understand that in the city of Los Angeles, they also had sweeps of some sort?
That's correct. And it was very similar to the program here. And the Ninth Circuit has said, you can't do that.
So, as lawyers, we know. So it went to the district court level, and it went up to the Federal Court of Appeals.
That's correct.
Within a short period of time.
That is correct.
And so what is the status currently in Los Angeles?
Well, Los Angeles sought to have Supreme Court review of the Ninth Circuit's ruling.
United States Supreme Court.
United States Supreme Court, to ask them to reverse it. And the United States Supreme Court denied that request. So this is the law of our circuit. You cannot summarily come in and seize people's property, even houseless people on the sidewalk, and you cannot summarily destroy it without giving them an opportunity to have a hearing before it's destroyed. That's the law of this circuit.
But Carl, if I remember again correctly, or if I have read it correctly, the news report that I read recently, coming from the Honolulu Corporation Counsel's office, the report or the news stated that, the bulletin stated, that what the city was doing was consistent with the law. But now I'm hearing another side where the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals have ruled that it's not consistent with the constitutional rights guaranteed.
Well,
so we have here.
Yeah, I think there are two things there, Roy. I think on the one hand, what the city is arguing is, well, our ordinance, our two ordinances, the storage of property and the sidewalk ordinance, are legal under the standard in the announced by the Ninth Circuit in the Los Angeles case. And our practices are too. I think the real issue here is, are the practices consistent with what the Ninth Circuit has said are allowed? And my reading of the Ninth Circuit case and my reading of what the testimonies are regarding what the city is doing here is that they are not consistent with the principles announced by the Ninth Circuit, because they're taking property without proper due process, and they're seizing it in a way that is not justified under the law.
Carl, we're going to have to take a break again. We are going to take a short break. Any questions again, please contact us at ThinkTech Hawaii. Thank you very much. We'll take a short break.
Hi, my name's Hillary Weinberg. I'm the host of The Whole Gamut on ThinkTech Hawaii. See us live every Tuesday at 1 p.m. or on our YouTube channel to hear us talk about world affairs from Hawaii and beyond. See you then.
Hi, I'm Donna Blanchard. I'm the host of Center Stage here on ThinkTech Hawaii. Center Stage airs every Wednesday at 2 o'clock, and of course you can check out our archives on YouTube or on ThinkTech Hawaii anytime you like. Why should you do that? Because this is an arts show that I believe is making a difference in lives. We talk with artists of various ilk. We talk with painters and writers, playwrights, novelists, poets, sculptors, dancers, you name it, directors, actors, of course. And we don't only talk about what people do, but we talk about how they do it. And my favorite part of the conversation, we talk about why they do it. And it's really common on this show to hear people say, wow, I didn't think about it that way. And it's very common to hear people afterwards who have seen the show say the same thing. And I hear all the time that people are inspired by the conversations that we have. So why don't you join us and be inspired too? That's Center Stage on Wednesdays at 2 o'clock. We'll see you Center Stage.
Aloha, and our theme this afternoon is the homeless and their civil liberties. My guest is Carl Varady. And Carl, let us talk about another conflicting issue involving the homeless in Hawaii, and that's economics. As we are all aware, the economic engine in Hawaii now is tourism. It used to be sugar, it used to be pineapple, but now without tourism, Hawaii is like a sinking battleship, and without it, we don't have an economy. So the way I view the homeless situation is this. We have a very important industry, which is the tourist industry, tourism. And then when all these tourists who come to Hawaii see all the homeless in Waikiki, in Kapiolani Park, they go to Chinatown and they see the homeless in Chinatown. It's a turnoff, Carl, a turnoff. I've had clients from Japan who tell me, you know, Hawaii used to be a very beautiful place, very nice. And now when we come to Hawaii, there are homeless people in Waikiki, and many times the sidewalk, and you mentioned the sidewalk ordinance, there are homeless people sleeping on the sidewalk. So now we have this conflict between this economic engine, which is tourism, and we have a very sympathetic situation of the homeless. And I didn't mention earlier, but many of the homeless, I understand, are mentally ill. They are veterans of some war. They're children, and they're elderly. In fact, in downtown, as I come to work, I see 2 elderly women every morning. You know, I feel sorry for these 2 women. I don't know why they don't get housing. But again, let me ask you, Carl, what is your take or opinion on this contrasting, conflicting, opposing views on the economy and the homeless?
Well,
and if there are court cases, maybe you can mention. I'm not aware.
Yeah, I think the general principle is that when economics contrast with civil rights and constitutional rights, economics lose. That's the general principle. You can go back to the vagrancy laws of the 1960s. There's a...
why did we have these vagrancy laws?
Well, for the very reasons that you mentioned. St. Augustine, Florida, There's a famous case, Papa Christou, out of there,
Yeah.
where, they were chasing a houseless guy out of town
Mm-hmm.
because they felt that he was dirtying up, the city and affecting tourism in St.
Yeah.
Augustine.
Right.
And the Supreme Court said, you can't chase somebody out of town merely because they're houseless and have no job. That's not a crime. Being houseless, we don't have a system where you must own property to be a citizen. You don't have to own property to be protected by the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, thank goodness. Our forebearers and authors of the Constitution made sure that that was not the case. And we don't have a system where property ownership and economics dictate whether or not you have rights. Now, the balancing comes in the balance between public health and safety and these constitutional rights. Now, if there were some sort of emergency, for example, if you look back in the early 1900s, you'll see cases in which
Supreme Court cases?
yes, tenements and whatnot led to outbreaks of disease.
Ah, I see.
And there were mandatory vaccination laws or mandatory housing laws that were challenged as unconstitutional. And the Supreme Court said, no, public health and safety in these instances, because the risk is so great, we are going to enforce these laws that might limit personal liberty to refuse, a vaccination of some sort, or public, or the right to do with your property what you will, when what you're doing with your property is creating an unsafe and unhealthy condition. That's where the balance is. And
Carl, let me interject again. I think you're aware too. In Kaka'ako, there's a children's museum.
yes,
And recently, there have been some newsworthy articles or television programs where they are saying that it's so unpleasant, for the lack of a term, for these young children to go to this children's museum because the homeless are in the front of the museum or around the museum. Isn't that a health and safety issue?
well, I don't think anyone has actually made that case. Now, the human body is what it is. We urinate, we
Right.
defecate, we eat.
Right.
This is the way life is, and we
Right.
perpetuate ourselves. But the city isn't proposing that kind of solution. In San Francisco, a nonprofit group has taken over disused city buses and converted them into portable washrooms where you can use a toilet, take a shower, and do so safely. I haven't seen the city proposing anything like that. Now, if you're just moving people from one place to another, they need to eat, they need to sleep,
I see. Right,
and they
right.
need to excrete. All these things are
Right.
what the human body does. And to ignore that is to ignore reality.
Let me cut in again, Carl. It is my understanding again that many times the city or the state will say to these homeless, there is a public facility and it's available, and if you apply, you may have an opportunity of getting into these public facilities, such as Sand Island. But I understand that many of the homeless do not want to go to Sand Island because the buses do not go into that part of Sand Island. So, we have a situation where there might be available facilities.
Well, sure, but I think that's pretty easy to figure out. I mean, you said you reroute the buses so they do go there.
Yeah, right.
How hard is that?
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of these problems just seem to be made up because
see.
people don't like the fact that there are mentally ill people, that there are poor people. We want to hide them away. We don't want to see them. We don't want to look at human suffering is the real thing, and deal with it as if it's our own responsibility.
It's like not in my neighborhood.
Well, yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
I just want to close my eyes and not have that as something that is my responsibility. Now, in 1980, in the 80s, during the Reagan administration, when community mental health funds were cut. Those have not been restored. And there are no, people do not have access to community mental health systems. There's been a huge issue with veterans. You mentioned veterans.
Right,
Just
right.
read the headlines
Right.
about waiting 145 days to get initial examination. Now, if you're mentally ill and suffering from PTSD, what happens in those 145 days? Do you think you get better? Of course not.
Yeah.
Now, the Sand Island thing is a ruse. Put some buses out there, you know, and provide, some of these things are low cost. You spend $2 billion on a rail system that no one will ride and that will be completed only after it's obsolete. Spend a few million on things like building some structures that people can occupy.
Right.
You know, providing sanitary places where they can bathe and take care of themselves, and educate them, because every one of those kids on the street is entitled to public education, and they're not getting it.
Right. Carl, we have lots more to talk on. It's a very complex issue. I don't think there is a right answer. I don't think it's a wrong situation. It's not an easy public issue to resolve immediately. If you have a chance again in the future, I'd like to invite you back to explore this more. Maybe in December when the judge makes a decision. Let's see what happens. So, Carl, thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome, Roy.
And
Thank you.
thanks for being my guest today. You were very informative. And to everyone out in the public, thank you for viewing our program this afternoon. Aloha.
Thank you.